I'm standing at the edge of a ballroom holding a navy blue box wrapped with a silver ribbon, and my father just told 300 people that not every child has what it takes. He didn't say my name, but every single person in that room knew exactly who he meant. The laughter that followed, polite and sharp, cut deeper than any silence ever could. I felt the blood drain from my face, but my hands stayed steady. I stood up. Every eye in the room turned toward me. I walked forward slowly, heels clicking against polished marble, not rushing, not shrinking. I reached the edge of the stage and looked directly at him. My voice didn't shake when I spoke. "From your biggest failure," I said calmly, handing him the gift. "Enjoy your retirement." Then I turned and walked away. Not a single part of me looked back. But here's what nobody knew in that moment. What was inside that box would haunt him far more than any public confrontation ever could. And the truth is, I'd been carrying that gift for 20 years, waiting for the right moment to finally let it go. My name is Emma Harrison. I'm 34 years old, and I'm the lead systems director at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Pasadena. I oversee a team of 42 engineers working on deep space satellite systems. Last year, our division helped coordinate the landing sequence for a Mars rover that's currently collecting samples from the Jezero crater. It's the kind of achievement that makes headlines, the kind most people dream about their entire careers. But when I called home to tell my family, my father asked if I was still doing that telescope stuff. That's who Richard Harrison is, a man who spent 42 years building rockets and aerospace systems, who rose from junior draftsman to CEO, who can name every engineer who ever worked under him. But he can't remember what his own daughter does for a living. Growing up in Austin, Texas, the Harrison house was clean, orderly, and emotionally sterile. Affection was rationed like it cost extra. My brothers Brandon and Tyler were the golden children. Football captains, Eagle Scouts, military-bound. Everything they did was celebrated. Everything I did was questioned. I remember being 11 years old, building a model rocket from scrap parts I'd collected from Dad's workshop. It actually launched. 30 feet straight up in our backyard before the parachute deployed perfectly. My mother clapped and took photos. My father asked if I'd stolen the parts without permission. That was the moment I learned that no matter what I accomplished, it would never be enough. Not because I wasn't capable, but because I wasn't one of his sons. I graduated with honors in aerospace engineering from the University of Michigan. I worked 2 jobs to cover what scholarships didn't, sleeping 4 hours a night, living on instant ramen and black coffee. Graduation day came on a sunny Saturday in May. The stadium was packed with families cheering, taking photos, crying with pride. I walked across that stage alone. No one from my family came. My father sent a text 3 hours later. It said, "Congrats, didn't realize that was today." I sat in my apartment that night, still wearing my cap and gown, eating cold pizza, wondering what I'd done wrong. The answer, I would later realize, was nothing. I'd simply been born the wrong gender in a family that only valued sons, but I kept trying. I took a position at Caltech's Jet Propulsion Lab that summer. I worked double shifts, volunteered for every impossible project, submitted patents, co-authored research papers. By 29, I was leading a division team. By 31, I was the youngest female engineering director in the organization's history. Trade publications wrote about me. Universities invited me to speak. Colleagues called me a trailblazer. But at every family holiday, when my father raised his glass to toast, he only mentioned Brandon and Tyler. Their promotions, their achievements, their futures. I was always just there, invisible, the daughter who wandered off into some science thing nobody really understood. 3 weeks ago, I received a formal invitation to my father's retirement gala. Black tie, Hilton ballroom, speeches and awards, a celebration of his 42-year career. I almost threw it away. Almost. But something made me keep it. Maybe it was hope. That stupid, stubborn hope that lives in the corners of your heart even when logic tells you to let it die. Maybe this time would be different. Maybe after all these years, he'd finally see me. So I bought a plane ticket. I booked a hotel room, and I spent an entire week trying to write a speech that wouldn't make things worse. The gift came to me on a Tuesday afternoon while I was cleaning out old storage boxes in my closet. Buried under college textbooks and forgotten journals, I found a worn manila folder. Inside was a photograph, faded but still clear. Me at 12 years old, standing at a local science fair, holding a blue ribbon. First place, district-wide. I'd built a scale model of the International Space Station from soda cans, wire, and determination. My father stood beside me in the photo, his hand on my shoulder, smiling. A real smile, not the corporate mask he usually wore. That moment, frozen in time, was the last time I ever remembered him looking at me like I mattered. I stared at that photo for a long time. Then I took it to a frame shop and had it professionally mounted in a simple silver frame. I wrapped it carefully in navy blue paper with a silver ribbon. Understated, elegant, just like everything in the Harrison family. And I wrote a note on plain cardstock in my neatest handwriting. This was the last time you looked at me like I mattered. I spent 20 years chasing that version of you. I'm done now. The night before the party, I stood in my hotel bathroom rehearsing a speech I wasn't even sure I wanted to give. Something polite, neutral, expected. Because that's how I'd survived most of my life, trying not to give him more reasons to be disappointed. Behind me in the mirror's reflection, the gift box sat on the dresser. I couldn't shake the feeling that tomorrow would change everything. I just didn't know how much. I arrived at the Hilton 20 minutes early because anxiety makes me overcompensate. The valet reached for my keys and I hesitated. My black Tesla wasn't flashy by Los Angeles standards, but here in Texas, it screamed tech girl trying too hard. I handed over the keys anyway and walked through the golden revolving doors into the lobby. The ballroom was already half full. Round tables dressed in white linen, centerpieces tall enough to block conversation. Waiters gliding between guests like shadows. Classical music played softly from hidden speakers. Everything was perfectly orchestrated, sterile, just like my childhood. A massive projection screen dominated the far wall, playing a looped slideshow of my father's career. Photos of him in his 20s standing in front of rocket prototypes. Shaking hands with military generals, receiving awards in boardrooms, posing with engineering teams. 42 years compressed into 3 minutes of repeating images. I watched the entire loop twice. Not a single family photo appeared. No Christmas mornings, no birthday parties, no kids graduating. Just Richard Harrison in various suits and hard hats, building his legacy one project at a time. The message was clear. Work was family. Achievement was love. Everything else was decorative. I spotted my mother across the room. Margaret Harrison wore a pale blue dress and pearl earrings, her silver hair perfectly styled. She saw me and waved, a small, discreet motion like someone afraid of drawing attention. She'd spent 35 years supporting my father's career, hosting dinner parties, maintaining the perfect home, raising 3 children who learned early that Dad's work always came first. She caught my eye and smiled, then quickly looked away. Even now, she was afraid to be caught paying too much attention to me. Look who finally showed up. The voice came from behind me. I turned to find Brandon, my older brother, looking like a politician in training. Tailored navy suit, perfect teeth, military posture. Tyler stood beside him, adjusting his tie, giving me a brief nod of acknowledgement. Still working at NASA or SpaceX or whatever it is? Brandon asked, pulling me into a hug that felt like a business transaction. Still at JPL, I answered, keeping my voice neutral. Oh, right, the telescope place, Tyler added with a dismissive smile. Dad always says that's more science club than real engineering. I smiled tightly, swallowing the urge to remind them that our team had just successfully landed equipment on another planet. Instead, I said, well, we did help put a rover on Mars last year, so I guess we're doing something right. They laughed, not unkindly, just dismissively, and moved on to greet another cluster of bitsi, guests. And just like that, I was back in high school. Invisible. The girl with the wrong kind of dreams. A waiter passed with champagne flutes on a silver tray. I took one and moved toward the windows, watching the sunset over downtown Austin. Across the room, my father held court, surrounded by executives and former colleagues. Richard Harrison at 65 looked exactly like he did at 40. Tall, composed, commanding. His laugh boomed across the ballroom. He clapped hands on shoulders, gestured broadly. told stories everyone had heard before. He looked at Brandon and Tyler with obvious pride. He kissed my mother's cheek. But he never once glanced in my direction. The lights dimmed. A woman in a black pantsuit stepped to the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, if you could please take your seats. Tonight we celebrate a titan of industry, a man who dedicated over 4 decades to aerospace advancement. Please welcome the one and only Richard Harrison." Thunderous applause erupted. People stood. My father walked to the stage, waving like a senator, pausing for dramatic effect before he reached the podium. The spotlight followed him. He was in his element, the center of attention, the man of the hour. Thank you," he began, his voice filling every corner of the room. "This has been the journey of a lifetime, and I wouldn't be standing here without the support of my incredible family." My chest tightened. I sat up straighter in my chair. He smiled, that practiced corporate smile I'd seen 1,000 times. My sons, Brandon and Tyler, have always made me proud. Both of them followed in my footsteps. Both chose to serve, to lead, to build. Everything I've achieved, I owe to them. They represent the Harrison name with strength and honor. The crowd erupted in applause. People actually stood up to cheer for my brothers. Brandon and Tyler stood at their table, waving modestly, soaking in the validation. My father waited for the noise to settle, then his expression shifted. His tone became softer, almost nostalgic, like he was about to share something profound. He paused for effect. "Not every child has what it takes," he said slowly. "And that's okay. Not everyone is cut from the same cloth. Some wander." He didn't say my name. He didn't need to. The glances, the awkward shifting in seats, the whispered murmurs, they all pointed directly at me. Polite laughter rippled through the room, small and sharp, and it cut deeper than any silence ever could. My mother's face went pale. Brandon looked uncomfortable. Tyler stared at his plate. And my father, standing in the spotlight, continued talking about legacy and tradition and passing the torch to those who truly understood what it meant to carry the family name. That's when I stood up. The room went silent. Every eye turned toward me. I reached down and picked up the navy blue box I'd placed carefully under my chair. My hands were steady. My breathing was calm. I walked forward, heels clicking, against marble, each step deliberate and measured. I didn't rush. I didn't shrink. I walked past tables of strangers and colleagues and family friends who'd watched me grow up invisible. I reached the edge of the stage. My father stood frozen at the podium, microphone in hand, finally looking directly at me for the first time all night. I held the box out in both hands. My voice carried across the silent ballroom, clear and unwavering. "From your biggest failure," I said. "Enjoy your retirement." I placed the box on the edge of the stage, then I turned and walked away. Past the tables, past the shocked faces, past my brothers and my mother and 300 people who'd just witnessed something they didn't fully understand. I walked out of that ballroom with my head high, and I didn't look back once. I didn't drive away immediately. Instead, I sat in my car in the parking garage, engine off, hands gripping the steering wheel. My chest felt tight, but not with panic. What I felt was colder, slower, like standing in a snowstorm you'd seen coming for years and only now decided to walk into. My phone buzzed on the passenger seat, a text from Mom. Then another from my college roommate, Sophia, who'd begged me not to attend tonight. Then one from Tyler. What was in the box? I didn't answer. I already knew what was happening inside that ballroom right now, the moment I'd walked out of but hadn't entirely left behind. My father wouldn't open the box immediately, not in front of the crowd. He was too controlled for that, too concerned with appearances, but curiosity would win eventually. It always did with Richard Harrison, the man who needed to understand everything, to control every variable, to never be caught off guard. I imagined him backstage, away from the cameras, carefully pulling off the silver ribbon, lifting the lid, seeing the framed photograph staring back at him. The photo showed both of us at that science fair when I was 12. Me holding my first place ribbon, beaming with pride. Him with his hand on my shoulder, actually smiling. A genuine smile, not the practiced corporate expression he used in every professional photo. That moment captured the last time he'd looked at me like I was worth something. The last time he'd seemed proud. Before I became the daughter who didn't fit his vision, who asked too many questions, who wanted to build rockets instead of supporting the men who did. Beneath the photo, tucked into the frame, was my note. This was the last time you looked at me like I mattered. I spent 20 years chasing that version of you. I'm done now. Simple. Clear. Final. My phone lit up again. This time it was a notification from Instagram. Someone had posted a video clip from the retirement speech. The audio was muffled, but you could see everything. My father's dismissive words, me standing up, walking to the stage, handing him the box, then leaving. The caption read, "When you finally stop asking for approval and start demanding respect." The video already had 3,000 views and climbing. I scrolled through the comments. Some people thought it was staged, performative. Others called it a power move. A few criticized me for ruining his special night. But what struck me most were the direct messages flooding my inbox. "I wish I had your courage. That line from your biggest failure destroyed me." He sounds exactly like my father. My hands are shaking watching this. These were strangers, but they understood. They'd lived versions of my story. Daughters overlooked, achievements dismissed, worth questioned. For the first time in my life, I wasn't invisible. People were seeing me, really seeing me, not as a footnote in someone else's legacy, but as the author of my own. My phone rang. Mom. I stared at her name on the screen, thumb hovering over the answer button. On the 6th ring, I picked up. "Emma." Her voice was brittle and urgent. "What was in that box?" "You already know," I said quietly. There was noise in the background, muffled and tense. My father's voice, low and sharp. She didn't speak for a moment. Then, "You blindsided him." I almost laughed. "No, Mom, he's been blindsiding me for 30 years. Silence stretched between us. Finally, she whispered, "He didn't mean to hurt you, sweetheart. He just doesn't know how to show emotions. He was raised to believe feelings are weakness." "I wasn't asking for tears," I said, my voice flat. "Just acknowledgement. And after tonight, I'm done asking." I ended the call before she could respond. Because the truth was, I didn't trust what would come next. Another excuse. Another explanation. Another reason why I should understand, forgive, accept. I'd spent my entire life understanding. Tonight, I chose myself. The next morning, I turned my phone off and spent hours walking through downtown Austin. Coffee shops, bookstores, the trail along Lady Bird Lake. It felt surreal, watching joggers and families and tourists living their normal Saturday while my entire world had shifted. By noon, I turned my phone back on. 38 unread messages. I skipped the ones from Brandon and Tyler. I already knew what they'd say. Defend Dad. Accuse me of being dramatic, selfish, attention-seeking. Tell me I'd embarrass the family. But one message stopped me cold. From Dad. Just 2 words. "We need to talk." I stared at those 5 syllables for a long time. There was no anger in them, no apology either. Just a summons, an expectation that I'd come when called. Like always. Except this time felt different. Because I wasn't the same person who'd walked into that ballroom yesterday. I'd left something behind in that moment. Not just the gift box, but the desperate need for his approval. The fantasy that someday he'd look at me and say I was enough. That evening, I found myself driving toward my childhood home. Not out of obligation, but curiosity. Maybe closure. The house looked exactly the same. Red brick, manicured lawn, porch light always on. Nothing ever changed here, even when everything had. I let myself in with the key I'd never returned. Inside, it smelled like lemon polish and old memories. I found him in the den, sitting in his leather armchair, holding the framed photograph. He didn't look up when I entered. For a full minute, we existed in silence, the only sound the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. Then, without looking at me, he spoke. "I don't remember that day." "Of course you don't," I said. "It was important to me." That made him flinch. Subtle, But there. He set the photo on the coffee table between us like evidence neither of us wanted to touch. You think I never cared? He asked. I don't think it, I replied. I lived it. I pushed you, he said quietly, because I saw something in you. Something sharp, unrelenting. No, I corrected. You pushed me away. There's a difference. Finally, he looked at me. Really looked. I didn't know how to handle you. You weren't like the boys. You didn't seek approval. You challenged everything. You challenged me. I folded my arms. And that made me less worthy of respect? He hesitated, like the answer was more complicated than he wanted to admit. You reminded me of your grandfather, he finally said. The way you questioned everything. The way you hated tradition just for tradition's sake. He never approved of me either. Never thought I was good enough for this family's name. There it was, the generational wound passed down like a curse. So I spent my life being punished for something that had nothing to do with me, I said. You were never a failure, Emma, he replied. I just didn't know how to raise a daughter like you. You didn't try, I said. You just ignored me until I stopped trying to be seen. He looked at me again, and for the first time, I saw something raw in his eyes. I saw you, he said. I just didn't know what to do with what I saw. That was the closest I'd ever get to an apology. And strangely, it was enough. Not because it fixed anything. It didn't. But because I finally understood. I'd spent 34 years trying to earn something he was never equipped to give, and that wasn't my failure. It was his. 2 weeks later, I flew back to Los Angeles. The plane soared over mountains and coastline, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was escaping. I was simply going home. Back to JPL, back to work that mattered, back to a life I'd built with my own hands. No family name carrying me, just hard work, late nights, and the belief that rejection could become fuel. My division head stopped by my office on my second day back. You're still good for the keynote next month? She asked. I blinked. The STEM Leadership Summit. You're our first female lead invited in over a decade. Given your background, your story could mean something to the younger women in the audience. I knew what she meant by background, not just the engineering degrees or the patents. She meant the fact that I'd succeeded despite my family, not because of them. I'm in, I said. Absolutely. That night, I sat on my balcony overlooking the city and opened my laptop. The first line came instantly. Sometimes the greatest fuel for a rocket isn't fire. It's rejection. I wrote about growing up invisible, about how brilliance gets ignored when it doesn't fit the expected narrative, about learning that you're not obligated to prove yourself to people who refuse to see you. I ended with a message I wish someone had told me at 16, at 22, at 30. Some legacies are worth breaking, and sometimes the most revolutionary thing you can do is walk away, not in anger, but in clarity. The speech went viral within 48 hours. News outlets picked it up. STEM organizations shared it. Young women sent messages saying, "You told my story," but that wasn't the point. The point was I'd finally told mine. My brothers never reached out after the party. That was fine. I'd stopped chasing people who only saw me as a problem. Mom called occasionally. Our conversations were cautious, gentle, like walking on ice. But slowly, things thawed. I should have done more, she said once. I know, I replied. But I also know you loved me, even if you couldn't show it in front of him. 3 months later, a small envelope arrived with no return address. Inside was the photograph, the same one I'd given my father. On the back, written in his sharp block handwriting, was a note. I didn't forget this day. I tried to, because it scared me how much I loved that version of you. You deserved more than I gave. I'm sorry. No signature, no warm closing, just that. I folded the note and placed it in a drawer where I used to keep every disappointing birthday card he'd ever sent. The drawer wasn't filled with pain anymore. It was filled with perspective. Because sometimes the apology doesn't come the way you wanted. Sometimes it doesn't come until after you've stopped needing it. And that's what healing looks like. Not clean, not cinematic, but real. And enough. So if you've ever felt like the invisible one, the failure, the one who didn't fit, know this. You don't have to earn someone's love to be worthy of it. Walk tall, walk forward, and if you need to, walk away. If this story resonated with you, share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories about finding strength in the moments that break us.
This morning, I walked into my office at Global Tech Solutions, the Chicago skyline gleaming through the glass, unaware that by noon, my world would turn upside down. My name is Zara Thompson. I'm 38, and until today, I was the director of operations for one of America's top software companies. For a decade, I poured my soul into this place, crafting code that protects millions in bank transactions, earning praise from a boss who called me the company's future. But whispers in the halls hinted at a storm brewing, a storm named Daniela, my boss's daughter. As I sipped my coffee, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to unravel, something that would test everything I'd built. 10 years ago, I started at Global Tech Solutions as a junior programmer, a wide-eyed coder with big dreams and a knack for solving problems. The company, nestled in Chicago's bustling tech hub, was already a powerhouse, known for its cutting-edge software. I climbed the ranks through grit and late nights, my proudest achievement being SecureBank, a security system now guarding bank transactions across the U.S. It's the kind of software that hums quietly in the background, protecting people's life savings from hackers. Every line of code felt like a piece of me, woven into the company's success. Global Tech wasn't just a job, it was my legacy, my proof that hard work could carve a place in a world that often overlooked women like me. My boss, Richard Morgan, the CEO, used to be my biggest cheerleader. "Zara, you're the future of this company," he'd say, his voice booming across boardrooms. At 50, with silver streaks in his hair and a tailored suit that screamed old money, Richard had inherited Global Tech from his father, Albert Morgan, the genius who founded it. Albert was a legend, a man who saw potential where others saw obstacles. Richard, though, was different, charming but slippery, his praise often tinged with calculation. Lately, his compliments had dried up, replaced by distracted nods and closed-door meetings. I chalked it up to the stress of running a multi-billion-dollar company, but a nagging doubt lingered, like a shadow I couldn't quite see. This morning started like any other. I arrived at 7 a.m., my heels clicking on the polished floors of our 30th floor office. The view of Lake Michigan always steadied me, a reminder of how far I'd come. I settled at my desk, reviewing overnight reports from the development team. SecureBank was in the middle of a major upgrade, and every detail mattered. My assistant Mary, a sharp 30-year-old with a knack for reading the room, greeted me with a hesitant smile. "Zara, there's talk going around," she said, her voice low. "They say Daniela's joining the company." Daniela Morgan, Richard's 23-year-old daughter, is fresh out of a private university with a business degree. I'd met her at corporate events, her designer heels and smug grin screaming entitlement. "Figures," I replied, eyes on my laptop. "She'll probably start in marketing or something entry-level." Mary bit her lip, her silence louder than words. I brushed it off, focusing on the data streaming across my screen. Daniela was a spoiled kid, sure, but Richard wouldn't be foolish enough to disrupt operations for her. Would he? Global Tech was a well-oiled machine, employing hundreds, with clients from New York to San Francisco. SecureBank alone protects transactions worth billions daily. A rookie like Daniela couldn't just waltz in and mess with that. Still, Mary's unease stuck with me, a splinter in my mind. I thought of Albert, who'd mentored me early on, his gravelly voice urging me to protect what matters. He'd passed away 2 years ago, leaving Richard in charge, but his wisdom still guided me. I glanced at a framed photo on my desk, me and Albert at a product launch, his proud smile a rare treasure. As I typed, my phone buzzed with a message from James, our head of development. "Heard anything about Daniela?" Team's worried. I sighed, rubbing my temples. The rumor mill was churning, and I needed to keep my team focused. "Nothing concrete," I texted back. "Let's keep our eyes on the upgrade." But the air felt charged, like the calm before a thunderstorm. Mary hovered by the door, clutching a stack of papers. Zara, you should know, it's not just talk. People saw Daniela with Richard in the executive suite yesterday. My fingers paused over the keyboard. The executive suite? That wasn't a place for interns. A chill ran through me, sharp and unwelcome. Whatever was coming, I had a sinking feeling it would change everything. The whispers about Daniela Morgan swirled in my head like a gathering storm, but nothing could have prepared me for the moment my office door swung open, shattering a decade of loyalty in seconds. I'm Zara Thompson, and this morning, as I sat in my Chicago office at Global Tech Solutions, my world tilted on its axis. Mary's warning about Daniela lingered, her hesitant words echoing as I tried to focus on Secure Bank's upgrade reports. But when Richard Morgan, my boss, stormed in with his daughter smirking behind him, I knew this wasn't about rumors anymore. It was a betrayal, cold and calculated, dressed in designer heels and false promises. I was halfway through a report when Richard barged in without knocking, his face a mask of forced authority. Daniela, 23, trailed him, her glossy hair and diamond earrings catching the light. She scanned my office like a predator sizing up its prey. Zara, we need to talk, Richard said, his voice sharp, devoid of the warmth he once reserved for me. I closed my laptop, heart pounding. Of course, I replied, keeping my tone steady. Is this about the Secure Bank 2.0 rollout? Daniela cut me off, her voice dripping with condescension. It's about my new role, Zara. Richard cleared his throat, avoiding my eyes. You've done adequate work, Zara, but Global Tech needs fresh blood. Daniela's taking over as Director of Operations, effective immediately. The words hit like a punch to the gut. I stared at Richard, waiting for the punchline, but his grim expression confirmed the truth. Daniela, a recent business grad with zero coding experience, was replacing me? Richard, I said, my voice tight. We're mid-rollout for Secure Bank 2.0. The team's stretched thin, and Daniela, Richard interrupted, waving a hand. My daughter has bold ideas, Zara, modern ones. Daniela sauntered to my desk, picking up a framed award for Secure Bank's innovation. This can all be packed by tonight, right? She said, smirking. I'm thinking minimalist decor. Your stuff's a bit dated. I clenched my fists, fighting the urge to snap. Secure Bank protects billions in transactions daily. One glitch could cripple banks nationwide. Daniela, I said, forcing calm, Secure Bank is a critical system. A single error could... Richard's face reddened. Don't lecture me, Zara. The decision's final. You're out. Daniela pouted, her voice syrupy. Daddy, can we update the dev team too? Their methods are so last century. Richard nodded, indulgent. Whatever you need, princess. I stood, my chair scraping the floor. This is a mistake, Richard. Not just unfair, it's reckless. Secure Bank isn't a toy. Daniela laughed, a sharp, grating sound. Relax, Zara. My boyfriend's a tech influencer. He's got connections. I nearly choked. An influencer? For a system guarding millions? You have until 5 p.m. to clear out, Richard snapped, turning to leave. Daniela lingered, eyeing my coat rack. And that jacket? So unprofessional. This office needs a class. As they exited, I heard her whisper, Told you she'd crumble, Daddy. I sank into my chair, the room spinning. 10 years, countless nights, breakthroughs, sacrifices, erased for a spoiled heiress. Mary burst in, her face pale. Zara, the team's livid. James and Anna are ready to quit. My pulse raced, but a flicker of resolve sparked inside me. Tell them to hold off, I said, opening my desk's bottom drawer. Mary frowned. But Zara, they can't just fire you. You built Secure Bank. I pulled out a sealed folder, its weight heavy with secrets. Mary, remember 2 years ago after Albert's death, when I asked you to store some documents? Her eyes widened. Yeah, you said they were private. I broke the seal, my fingers steady despite the chaos. It's time to open them. The folder held papers from Albert Morgan, Richard's father, and Global Tech's founder. He'd been my mentor, a visionary who saw potential in me when I was just a coder. These documents were his final gambit, a safeguard against his son's greed. I skimmed the top page, a faint smile forming. Richard thought he'd won, but he didn't know the game wasn't over. "Zara, what's in there?" Mary asked, her voice trembling. I closed the folder, standing taller. Proof that this company isn't Richard's to give away. As I spoke, Laura from legal poked her head in. "Zara, Richard's called an emergency board meeting to announce Daniela's role." I nodded, gripping the folder. "Perfect. Let's go." The storm was here, and I was ready to face it. The air in Global Tech Solutions' Chicago headquarters crackled with betrayal as I clutched the sealed folder, its contents a ticking bomb ready to upend Richard Morgan's smug victory. "I'm Zara Thompson, and minutes ago, my boss fired me to hand my job to his entitled daughter, Daniela, oblivious to the secret I held." As I strode toward the boardroom, Mary trailing with a box of what looked like my office belongings, my heart pounded, not with fear, but with purpose. Richard thought he'd erased me from the company I'd built, but the documents in my hand, entrusted by his late father Albert, were about to rewrite the story. The emergency board meeting loomed, and I was ready to drop a truth that would shake the very foundations of global tech. The boardroom doors loomed ahead, sleek glass etched with the company logo. Inside, I could hear the low hum of voices, Richard's cronies, no doubt, toasting Daniela's undeserved ascension. Mary hesitated, her eyes wide. "Zara, are you sure about this?" I gave her a nod, my resolve ironclad. Albert prepared me for this moment. Trust me. Pushing open the doors, I stepped into a sea of tailored suits and skeptical glances. Richard sat at the head of the mahogany table, Daniela perched in my usual chair, scrolling on her phone. The board, 6 older men, loyal to Richard's wallet, chatted amiably. "Zara," Richard said, his smile dripping with condescension. "No need to be here. HR can email your severance." I ignored him, standing tall by the door. Mary set the box down, its contents not my belongings, but copies of Albert's documents, ready to distribute. "I wouldn't miss this meeting for the world," I said, my voice cutting through the room's chatter. Richard's brow furrowed, but he pressed on. "Fine. Let's begin. I've called you to announce Daniela's appointment as Director of Operations, a bold step forward." The board nodded, predictable as clockwork. I raised a hand, my tone calm but unyielding. "Before we proceed, can we review the minutes from the last Founders' Council meeting, specifically March 15th, 2 years ago?" Richard's eyes narrowed. "That's irrelevant, Zara." I smiled, motioning to Mary, who began passing out folders to each board member. "Oh, it's very relevant," I said, "especially since it contains Albert Morgan's final will and the true ownership structure of global tech." The room stilled, forks pausing mid-bite from the catered lunch. One director, a grizzled man named Harold, opened his folder, his glasses slipping down his nose. "What is this?" he asked, scanning the pages. I stepped forward, the folder in my hand open to the key document. "It's Albert's last act as founder. Before he died, he transferred 60% of Global Tech's shares to a trust, and I'm its sole beneficiary." Gasps rippled through the room. Richard shot to his feet, his face flushing. "That's absurd! I inherited everything!" Laura, the legal director, a no-nonsense woman in her 40s, stood holding her copy. "As counsel, I can confirm these documents are legitimate, notarized, and filed with the state. Zara is the majority shareholder." Daniela looked up from her phone, confusion clouding her smug expression. "Daddy, what's she talking about?" Richard sputtered, but I pressed on, my voice steady. "Albert set 3 conditions for the trust's beneficiary: drive technological innovation, uphold the company's original vision, and protect employees from arbitrary decisions. He chose me because I've done exactly that." The memory of Albert's final night flooded back, vivid as if it were yesterday. He'd called me to his Lake Forest home, his frail form barely filling the armchair. "Zara," he'd said, his voice a rasp, "I've watched you. You don't just write code, you care about the people it serves. Richard sees dollar signs. You see lives to protect." I'd been stunned, unsure why he was confiding in me. "Why tell me this, Albert?" I'd asked. His eyes, sharp despite his illness, met mine. Because someone must guard Global Tech's soul, its innovation, its heart. That's you. He'd handed me the trust documents, swearing me to secrecy until the time was right. I'd promised to honor his faith, a vow I now fulfilled. Back in the boardroom, silence hung heavy. Harold adjusted his glasses, reading aloud. The trust activates if leadership threatens the company's mission. Zara, you're claiming that's now? I nodded, meeting each board member's gaze. Richard's decision to replace me with Daniela, who lacks the expertise to manage SecureBank, proves it. Albert foresaw this. Richard slammed a fist on the table. Lies. My father would never... I cut him off, holding up Albert's handwritten letter. Its ink faded, but unmistakable. He did, Richard. The night before he died, he told me himself. The boardroom was a powder keg, and I'd just lit the fuse. Whatever came next, Global Tech's future hung in the balance, and I was ready to fight for it. The boardroom of Global Tech Solutions was a battlefield, the air thick with shock as I, Zara Thompson, stood holding Albert Morgan's letter, my revelation as majority shareholder still reverberating. Richard Morgan's face was a mask of fury, his daughter Daniela frozen in my chair, her phone forgotten. I'd just exposed Albert's trust, proving I owned 60% of the company, but the fight wasn't over. The board members clutched their folders, eyes darting between me and Richard, sensing the storm about to break. I tightened my grip on the documents, ready to unveil the rot Richard had sown, knowing one misstep could cost billions in trust and dollars. This wasn't just about my job. It was about saving Global Tech from ruin. I set Albert's letter down, pulling another folder from Mary's box, its contents a meticulously compiled audit. There's more, I said, my voice slicing through the tense silence. Albert didn't just protect Global Tech's ownership. He ordered a full audit of its finances, completed after his death. I nodded to Laura, who projected the audit summary onto the boardroom screen. Rows of numbers glowed, detailing transactions that made the board lean forward. Over the last 2 years, I continued, $50 million has been siphoned from development budgets to offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. Harold, the grizzled director, squinted at his copy. This can't be right. Richard, explain this. Richard's chair creaked as he shifted, his bravado crumbling. That's confidential financial strategy, he stammered. I raised an eyebrow, pointing to the screen. Confidential? Like the $10 million yacht docked in Miami, registered to a Global Tech subsidiary? Or the $15 million private jet you bought through a shell company? The boardroom erupted in murmurs, directors flipping through the audit with growing alarm. And let's not forget the $25 million condo in South Beach, I added, billed as a corporate retreat but used for your vacations. Richard's face drained of color, his hands gripping the table. This is a setup, Zara. You're twisting the truth. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed with a message from James, our head of development. I glanced at it, my stomach lurching. Daniela gave her boyfriend full access to SecureBank's source code. He's posted snippets online, calling it outdated. I held up the phone, my voice steady despite the rage boiling inside. Gentlemen, we have a security crisis. Daniela shared proprietary code protecting billions in bank transactions, with an unqualified influencer. Daniela's eyes widened, her voice shrill. I just wanted a second opinion. My boyfriend knows tech. I turned to her, incredulous. A TikTok influencer? For a system safeguarding America's banks? The board's murmurs turned to outrage. Harold slammed his folder shut. This is unacceptable. A breach like this could violate every client contract we have. Another director, a stern woman named Evelyn, pointed at Daniela. You gave sensitive code to an outsider? Do you realize the liability? Daniela shrank in her chair, her earlier arrogance gone. I thought he could help modernize it, she mumbled. Richard tried to intervene, his voice weak. She didn't mean harm. It's a misunderstanding. I shook my head, addressing the board. This isn't a misunderstanding, it's negligence. SecureBank's integrity is at stake, and our clients deserve better. Laura stood, her legal binder open. Zara's right. Unauthorized code access breaches our agreements with major banks. We're facing potential lawsuits, not to mention reputational damage. The screen flickered as she pulled up a screenshot from the influencer's social media, showing Secure Bank's code alongside a caption, "Time to fix this ancient system." The board gasped, Evelyn clutching her pearls. "This is a disaster," she said. "Richard, how could you let this happen?" Richard slumped, his authority evaporating. I trusted Daniela," he muttered, but the board wasn't listening. I stepped to the center of the room, the weight of Albert's trust grounding me. "Albert warned me about this," I said, my voice carrying a quiet fire. He knew Richard's priorities. Personal gain over the company's mission could lead to chaos. That's why he gave me control. I held up the audit's final page, detailing bonuses Richard had redirected to himself while development teams scraped by. "This isn't leadership," I said. "It's plunder." Harold nodded, his jaw tight. "We've seen enough. This company's on the brink because of you, Richard." Daniela's lip trembled, her voice barely a whisper. "Daddy, do something." But Richard was a ghost of himself, staring at the audit as if it were his obituary. The board's outrage swelled, directors exchanging furious glances. Evelyn spoke, her tone icy. "We need to act now to contain this breach and address the financial misconduct." I met her gaze, knowing the next moments would decide Global Tech's fate. "Agreed," I said. "But it starts with accountability. Richard and Daniela must answer for this, and we need to secure Secure Bank before the damage spreads." The room pulsed with tension, every eye on me. I felt Albert's presence, his words echoing. Protect what matters. Richard's empire was crumbling, Daniela's recklessness exposed, and the board was ready to move. But this was only the beginning. The real battle, reclaiming Global Tech's soul, lay ahead, and I was prepared to lead it. The Global Tech Solutions boardroom was a crucible of reckoning, the weight of Richard Morgan's betrayal, and Daniela's recklessness hanging like smoke. I, Zara Thompson, stood at the center, the board's outrage fueling my resolve as I held the evidence of $50 million misappropriated and Secure Bank's code exposed online. Richard slumped in his chair, a fallen king, while Daniela's eyes glistened with panic. The directors, once his allies, now looked to me, their majority shareholder, to chart the path forward. Albert Morgan's trust had armed me with power, but the real test was using it to save the company, not for revenge, but for redemption. As the board's murmurs grew, I knew this moment would define Global Tech's future. Harold, the grizzled director, rose, his voice gravelly with authority. "This is a travesty. Richard's malfeasance and Daniela's negligence threaten everything we've built. I propose an immediate vote to remove Richard as CEO." Evelyn, her expression steely, seconded the motion. "Agreed. His leadership is a liability." Richard's head snapped up, desperation in his eyes. "You can't do this. I'm Albert's son." I met his gaze, my voice calm but firm. "You were CEO, Richard, but $50 million in personal luxuries and a security breach qualify as just cause for removal." The board nodded, their folders of evidence damning. Laura, the legal director, called the vote. "All in favor?" Hands shot up, unanimous. Richard's shoulders sagged, his reign over. Laura turned to me, her binder closed. "Zara, as the majority shareholder and the architect of Secure Bank, the board recommends you as interim CEO to navigate this crisis." The room's attention shifted, a weight settling on me. Daniela whimpered, "This isn't fair," but no one listened. I stepped to the window, Chicago's skyline a stark reminder of Albert's legacy. His words echoed, "Power is to protect." I turned back, my decision clear. "I accept," I said, "but on 3 conditions." The board leaned in, pens poised. "First, we implement transparent governance. No more hidden accounts. Second, we establish an employee innovation fund to reward ideas from the ground up. Third, we give Richard and Daniela a chance to make this right." The directors exchanged glances, surprised by my leniency. Harold frowned. "After all this, you'd let them stay?" I nodded, glancing at Richard's defeated form. No criminal charges, Richard. If you return every cent of the $50 million, you'll keep a small, non-voting share, but your influence ends here. Richard swallowed hard, nodding faintly. I turned to Daniela, whose mascara was streaked. And you, Daniela, start as a trainee in development. If you want to lead in tech, you'll learn it from the code up. She bit her lip, silent, but her eyes held a flicker of something new, humility perhaps. Evelyn spoke, her tone pragmatic. What about the code breach? Banks are already calling. I gestured to Laura. We'll issue a statement, lock down Secure Bank's servers, and patch the exposed code. I'll meet with clients personally to rebuild trust. Laura nodded, jotting notes. It's a start. Your leadership's our best shot. The board murmured agreement, their confidence a lifeline. Mary, standing by the door, gave me a small smile, her earlier fear replaced by pride. I felt the gravity of my new role, not just as CEO, but as guardian of Albert's vision. As the meeting adjourned, I lingered by the window, the city's pulse steadying my own. Albert had seen this day coming, his trust a shield against his son's greed. Protect what matters, he'd said, and I understood now. Not just the company, but its people, the coders, the dreamers, even the fallen. Richard and Daniela had faltered, but I wouldn't discard them. Leadership wasn't about destruction, it was about building, even from ashes. My phone buzzed. James, reporting the team's relief at Richard's ousting. "We're with you, Zara," he wrote. I smiled, tucking the phone away. The boardroom emptied, leaving me with Mary, who gathered the scattered folders. "You could have crushed them," she said softly. "Why didn't you?" I traced the edge of Albert's letter still on the table. Because Albert believed in second chances. He gave me one when I was just a coder. Now it's my turn. Mary nodded, her eyes bright. "He'd be proud, Zara." I hoped so. The crisis wasn't over. Banks needed reassuring, code needed securing, but I felt ready. Global Tech was mine to protect, and I'd lead it not with vengeance, but with the strength Albert saw in me. The real work began now. 6 months after the boardroom showdown that crowned me interim CEO, I stand in my Chicago office at Global Tech Solutions, the city's heartbeat syncing with my own. I'm Zara Thompson, and the storm that nearly sank this company, Richard Morgan's greed, Daniela's recklessness, has given way to a dawn of renewal. The scars of that day linger, but they've forged something stronger. A global tech reborn, its pulse driven by innovation and trust. As I gaze at Lake Michigan's shimmer, I feel Albert Morgan's presence, his belief in me, a beacon. This isn't just a company, it's a promise kept, and today I see its future unfolding. The development floor hums with energy, coders collaborating on Secure Bank 3.0, a system fortified with new safeguards. Daniela, once the epitome of entitlement, now sits in a corner, her designer dresses swapped for jeans, her fingers dancing over a keyboard. She's a trainee, learning algorithms under James's guidance, and to my surprise, she's good, really good. Last week, she pitched a security patch that caught even James off guard. "She's got potential," he told me, a grudging respect in his voice. Daniela's arrogance has softened, replaced by a quiet determination to prove herself, not to her father, but to the team she once dismissed. Richard, too, has changed. He returned $48 million of the misappropriated funds, selling his yacht and condo to cover the rest. Now a consultant, he works remotely, his reports precise and devoid of the old swagger. I insisted on clear boundaries, no boardroom access, no influence. He's learning to respect the rules, a humbling shift for a man who once saw global tech as his kingdom. Our banks, initially shaken by the code leak, renewed their contracts after I flew coast to coast, demonstrating our new security protocols. Transparency, my first condition as CEO, rebuilt their faith, and Secure Bank's uptime hasn't faltered since. My office remains simple, a nod to Albert's no-nonsense style. 2 photos adorn my desk, one of the original dev team, grinning after Secure Bank's launch, and one of Albert, his eyes crinkling at my first promotion. A framed quote sits between them. "Power is to protect." It's my North Star. Mary bursts in, her tablet glowing with data. "The Employee Innovation Fund's a hit," she says, beaming. 20 proposals this quarter, from coders to admins. I smile, picturing Albert's nod of approval. The fund, my second condition, has unleashed ideas we'd never have tapped otherwise. A new encryption model, a user-friendly interface, all from the ground up. My laptop pings with an email from Daniela. Can we review my proposal for the banking module? I think it'll boost efficiency. I type back, development room, 3 p.m. Warmth spreading through me. She's learning, not just code, but the grit it takes to build something real. I lean back, the skyline a canvas of possibility. Albert chose me because he saw beyond titles, to the heart of leadership, creation, not destruction, guidance, not fear. We didn't just save global tech, we made it better, a mosaic of second chances and shared purpose. Mary lingers, her voice soft. Albert would be proud, Zara. You didn't just protect his legacy, you grew it. I touch the framed quote, its truth anchoring me. He knew what he was doing, I say, and now we all do. The development room awaits, Daniela's proposal a small step in a larger journey. True power, I've learned, isn't in owning 60% of a company. It's in fostering those who'll carry it forward. Albert's vision lives, not in boardrooms, but in the code we write, the trust we build, and the lives we protect. That's the legacy I lead, and it's only just begun.